Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Colleagues and collaborators joining us from around the world. Welcome to this side event where we will be discussing the power of gender transformative approaches and their potential to address discriminatory social norms, food security, and nutrition. While we wait for everybody to get settled, I would like to mention a few housekeeping tips to ensure we make the most of our time together today. This event is being recorded, and we will share the link with you once the event is over. The webinar will be conducted in English with simultaneous translation interpretation in Arabic, Chinese, French, Spanish, and Russian. Attendees are in view-only mode, and if you wish to introduce yourself, please do so in the chat, where you can post comments throughout the event. You can also post your questions in the Q&A box. We will monitor both boxes in the chat and the Q&A and address your queries as best we can during the Q&A session. In the interest of time, we will introduce our speakers only by their name and title, and we invite you to refer to our chat for the panelists' biographies. That is all. I see we have a fairly full house, so let us begin. Maximize vidas. Thank you. Okay, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, my name is Liz Burgess-Sims, and I am the Senior Gender Advisor at the World Food Programme. On behalf of WFP, FAO, and IFAD, I would like to welcome you all to the CFS side event on the power of gender transformative approaches, addressing discriminatory social norms to improve food security and nutrition for all. It is my privilege and pleasure to moderate such a distinguished panel, and I am delighted to see such a high number of participants online with us today. The event is organized in the framework of the Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches for Food Security and Nutrition, or the JPGTA, as we will refer to it. It's implemented by FAO, IFAD, and WFP in collaboration with and through the generous financial support of the European Union. The event is co-organized by the European Union, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ecuador, UN Women, and CARE International in Malawi. Our goal today is to raise awareness about the role of discriminatory social norms in creating and perpetuating gender inequalities to the detriment of food security and nutrition. To do so, we will showcase examples of successful methodologies and interventions to challenge and transform these norms. We have asked our speakers and panelists to bring you a curated set of experiences, methodologies, and best practices for implementing gender transformative approaches that improve food security and nutritional outcomes while accelerating progress in gender equality and women's empowerment. However, before we hear from our panelists, distinguished representatives from FAO and the European Commission will deliver the welcome and opening remarks. Without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Maximo Torero, FAO's Chief Economist, to deliver his opening remarks. Maximo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to be today with all of you. So good morning to all, and good evening to everyone connected from another time zone. On behalf of FAO, I am happy to welcome you all to this CFS side event hosted by the EU-RBA Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches in collaboration with its partners. Gender equality is essential to sustainable development and to achieve a world free from hunger and malnutrition and poverty. As you all know, we are off track and off path of achieving SDG 2, with more than 828 million people chronically undernourished in the world. And the world has made great progress towards gender equality, yet despite concentrated efforts, there is still no country that is on track to reaching the goal of gender equality. According to the 2022 Equal Measure report on the SDG Gender Index, not one of the 144 countries covered has achieved gender equality. In low-income and agricultural-dependent countries, gender inequalities remain particularly prevalent. Furthermore, according to the latest state of food security and nutrition in the World Report, the gender gap in food insecurity has widened under the shadows of COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, 31.9% of women in the world were moderately or severe food insecure compared to 27.6% of men. And this was because COVID-19 affected services and areas of the agri-food system that were more labor intensive in terms of female, and they were the most affected of the COVID-19. The 2022 Global Gender Gap Report, published by the World Economic Forum, indicates that on its current trajectory, it will now take around 132 years to close the gender gap worldwide, and 151 years to close the economic participation and opportunity gender gap, nearly 2 lifetimes for the average woman. Now, understand that that means, in the economic sense, a huge loss of GDP, of our value added, because basically women are not playing the role they are supposed to play. And therefore, we are not growing in what we were supposed to grow by the availability of that human capital. So this needs to change, and needs to change now. In light of such evidence, the global community will not only miss out on achieving SDG 5, but will also fail to harness gender equality as a catalyst for achieving the overall 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including SDG 2 on zero hunger, unless we step up our efforts and apply innovative transformational approaches. The COVID-19 pandemic and the climate and energy crisis have also shown that even when progress is achieved in gender equality, it can be very fragile to shocks, indicating that if the root cause of inequalities are not addressed, gender equality gains can always be overturned. These root causes are formal and informal discriminatory structures, including unequal social norms and imbalances in power relationships. Gender equality and women's empowerment are central to FAO's mandate to achieving food security, improving agricultural productivity, and nutrition for all. Therefore, FAO is deeply committed to identifying, understanding, and addressing the underlying causes of gender inequalities by integrating a gender transformative approach and related methodologies in its work. Because to achieve the change that we need to understand the causes and try to resolve them. This is clearly demonstrated by FAO Gender's policy and strategic framework, its active engagement in the Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches, and in several other initiatives that we have started. This joint program is an innovative initiative that is helping the Rome-based agencies to explore new ways to make agri-food systems more inclusive, just efficient and resilient. FAO and its sister agencies, IFAD and WFP, are very grateful for the EU's funding and collaboration for making this joint program happen. Gender norms, for instance, people in my community think that women should not own land or make the final decision about household purchases, prescribes women's and men's roles and responsibilities in the home and beyond it. They shape women's ability to learn to work, access markets, and to have bank accounts, to control finances and expenditure or influence decisions about what to grow, eat, how to feed their children, and what to sell and purchase. Imagine this context under the policy that we had during COVID-19, where workers were not able to go out of their houses, how women was able to make decisions and how they will be able to have access to assets to be able to cope and be resilient to this type of shocks. So access to assets and having empowerment to be able to make decisions is central. Gender norms can be very resistant to change, as they preserve underlying structures of power and are widely held and practiced. They are nested in people's minds and are institutionalized in laws, policies, and organizational practices. Addressing discriminatory norms in our development programs, and in particular gender norms, which are often considered as the leverage point for gender transformational change, is thus imperative to advance women's empowerment to food security and nutrition. It's not only the right to choose and the right to ask for something, it's also the equal treatment. If I have a woman and a man with the same human capital skills, they should be earning the same wage. They should be having the same income. And that's not what we observe today, unless in rural areas. Thus, it's among FAO's priority to develop effective interventions and support global policy processes that can help to transform unequal norms and power dynamics and respond to women's practical and strategic gender needs. This can ultimately lead to sustained, positive, and systemic change in women's and men's life and inclusive agricultural and rural development. This side event, colleagues, provides an excellent opportunity to promote a shared understanding of why and how greater commitment to integrating gender and transformative approaches in our operations and institutional arrangements can help us to realize our mandates and contribute to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you for joining this side event, and we hope that you will find it valuable, and I hope that we can move forward on this transformation that is needed to be able to achieve this SDG. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Maximo, for your warm welcome and for highlighting the possible consequences of not paying attention to unequal gender norms in our programming, as well as FAO's commitment to gender transformative approaches to deliver on SDG 2. Now let me give the floor to Renata Hallen, Minister, Counselor, Deputy Permanent Representative, Head of UN Section, EU Delegation to the Holy See, the Order of Malta, UN organizations in Rome, and to the Republic of San Marino. Renata, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, Liz, Maximo, and everybody here, especially those that come in at very, very early morning or very, very late from other time zones. So special thanks and welcome to them as well. Yeah, I'm stepping in here with introductory remarks to replace my director, Carla Montesi, who wanted initially. She was really adamant to be here, but she had to cancel for family reasons. So I'm very honored to speak on her behalf. And let me start with making a similar point that Maximo has already done very clearly as building an economic case for gender equality. So the EU attaches great attention to gender equality. It is a prerequisite for delivering on the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development as a whole. It is inconceivable to attain any of the SDGs as half of the world's population remains constrained because their rights are not respected and they cannot live up to their full potential to create wealth and well-being for themselves, their communities and societies. So how does the EU, the European Union, engage? In 2020, we developed a first gender equality strategy for all our member states, labeled a Union of Equality. Also in 2020, we adopted the third EU Gender Action Plan for external action. This plan sets ambitious targets, such as making sure that by 2025, at least 85% of all actions funded by the EU in its external relations contribute to gender equality and women's empowerment. The action plan upholds transformative, intersectional, and rights-based approaches. We identified gender transformative approaches as one of the three principles to tackle the root causes of gender-based discrimination. The action plan shall contribute to making the EU's engagement for gender equality more effective. In 2018, we decided to fund the Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches with the three UN Rome-based agencies with €5 million to tackle gendered social norms for gender equality and women's empowerment, thereby contributing to food security, improved nutrition, and sustainable agriculture. We are proud that this event today gives visibility to this joint programme. It raises awareness of the relevance of social norms, provides knowledge, tools, and good practice examples. It enables all stakeholders to better integrate gender transformative approaches in policy debates, working modalities, and cooperation programs. I'm looking forward to the inspirations from examples of good practice that we will learn about a little later. The joint program does generate interest and knowledge produced, lessons learned, and in its innovative tools. It contributes to a cultural shift within our own respective institutions and in our ability to work together. A few months ago, I have witnessed the interest in the guidance from this program in a technical event with hundreds of stakeholders attending from around the globe. I was impressed. This program is also one of the few visible endeavors of operational cooperation between the FAO, IFAD, and the World Food Programme. We would like to see more of this. When this event was initially planned, it was in the perspective of welcoming the finalized guidelines on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition of the Committee on World Food Security. We are not yet there, but hopeful that with the support from across regions, the CFS chair will steer the process and negotiations to finalizing the guidelines in the best possible manner. The development of the guidelines requires all CFS stakeholders to participate in the negotiations in a transparent and cooperative way. The guidelines are expected to provide some solutions to tackling hunger and malnutrition, which are worsening by new challenges, and that also require a multilateral and multi-stakeholder response. The EU appreciates the priority given to gender transformative approaches in these negotiations of the voluntary guidelines. We would like to keep focusing on that aspect going forward. For the EU, gender transformative approaches include examining, questioning, and changing rigid gender norms and imbalances of power which disadvantage women and girls and generate discriminations at all ages, starting from early childhood in societies. In this perspective, I trust we will learn from the following speakers about their experiences in using methodologies and strategies to address and assess discriminatory social norms. Please stay engaged with this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata, and in particular for framing the gender transformative approach around examining, questioning, and changing rigid gender norms and imbalances of power, which disadvantage women and girls and generate discrimination in societies. This reinforces the JPGTA's commitment to addressing the root causes of gender inequalities in order to advance food security and nutrition. From the standpoint of the Rome-based agencies, I can say that we greatly appreciate the support and collaboration of the European Union and the close partnership that we have developed under the joint program. We are committed to delivering the institutional culture shift that Renata just mentioned. It is up to all of us here today to embrace these new ideas and shift our perspectives. Before we begin the panel discussion, I would like to gently remind everyone to write your questions to the speakers and panelists in the Q&A box so that we can handle them at the end of the discussion. Now I will turn to our panelists. Our first speaker is Ms. Jemima Njuki, Chief Women's Economic Empowerment, UN Women. Dear Jemima, FAO's Maximo Torero and Renata Hallen from the EU have just referred to the importance of identifying and addressing unequal social norms for advancing gender equality, food security, and nutrition. Could you please help us dive deeper into this issue and tell us what is the most recent situation at the global scale?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you, Maximo and Renata, for those excellent framing remarks. And thank you so much for having me at this important conversation. We know social norms, perceptions, attitudes hinder women and girls from achieving their full potential and from enjoying their full rights. And at UN Women, occasionally we carry out a study to track how perceptions, attitudes, and norms are changing around the world. In 2022, early this year, we released a report called Gender Equality Attitude Study 2022, The Levels of Change. And this is an update to a report and study that we did back in 2018 that was published in 2019 called Are You Ready for Change? Gender Equality Attitudes 2019. Now, what this study aims to do is to measure the prevalence of discriminatory attitudes and gender-based stereotypes that perpetuate gender inequality, and to demonstrate how widespread and deeply entrenched these are, but also to see how these attitudes are changing. And we've done this study in 20 countries. And so it's really a diverse set of views and attitudes. before I talk a little bit about what some of the findings show, I want to emphasize why this conversation is so important, especially now when we are facing a food crisis and a cost of living crisis. What we found in the study was that a surprising 25% of respondents, basically a quarter of the people that are asked these questions, actually said that in times of food shortages, priority for food should be given to men. And 31% of respondents agreed that when jobs are scarce, as we have seen during COVID, the men should have more rights to a job than women. So these attitudes are not just, affecting daily lives of women and girls and men and boys and other gender diverse peoples, but at times of crisis, these are actually exacerbated. So I would like to talk about the attitudes just in a couple of key areas. The first is access to physical property, and Maximo actually alluded to this when he talked about ownership of land by women and some of the norms that actually make that not happen in many contexts. And in a majority of the countries, the results actually say it's easier for most men in comparison to women to buy property in their own name. And we are seeing a 14% gender gap in some of these beliefs. We saw this being notable in countries like Brazil, Kenya, and Nigeria, where men are nearly twice as likely as women to say that it is easy to buy property in their own name. The second area that I want to talk about that's really important is control over personal finances, because if women do not have control over finances, then their ability to actually take control of their lives is limited. More than half of the respondents think that most women have control over their lives, which is an important finding for us, because these are some of the belief systems that we are seeing change. But women still continue to be perceived as having less control over their personal finances than men. And we see about 61% of the people that were interviewed across these 20 countries thinking that most women do have a lot of control over their finances compared to about 70% of men. So a much smaller gender gap in terms of people's perceptions of women and men's control over their lives. Employment and work is an important area. And this is an area where we see widespread biases continuing to exist around the type of roles that women can perform compared to men. And we're seeing very minimal changes through the years with these surveys. So for example, we see about 40% of people agreeing that it is natural for men to earn more than women, and about 20% believing that men should be paid more than women for the same job. So there are some really disturbing, persistent attitudes that we need to focus on, because a third also agree that men are better suited to higher earning business executive roles than women are. And another 40% agreeing that lower paid service jobs are more suitable for women. Another disturbing one is family roles and responsibilities. And we know this is also a big concern because women and girls continue to bear a disproportionate burden of unpaid care work. So when it comes to expectations around family roles, 50% of the respondents expect women to be the primary caregiver, and this is across all age groups. And we see this belief more strongly held by men particularly those under the age of 35. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we see some really stubborn perceptions and attitudes. We see some changes, and that's why gender transformative approaches are really critical in helping us get to some of these changes. But we also must be aware of some of the very persistent and stubborn attitudes and norms that are continuing to hold women back. I'm going to stop there, Elizabeth, back to you.
Thank you, Jemima. These are some alarming findings, and I think a very useful read for all of us. Jemima, considering that engaging men and boys is one of the principles of gender transformative approaches, a must to achieve sustained change and substantive gender equality, can you share with us some strategies for shifting the attitudes and perceptions of men and boys so that they view themselves as partners in advancing gender equality?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So through this study, what we've actually seen is that men do not feel as strongly about gender equality as women do. So just an overview, that about 60% of men believe that more respect to women's rights is very important. And this is compared to 74% of women. But more worrying, as I said, is seeing that in times of hardship, gender attitudes and beliefs that drive people's decisions can actually lead to reversals. So it is very important that we men and women actually join hands in terms of changing these attitudes. And it is extremely important to reinforce the message that gender equality and the empowerment of women, as others have said before me, is critical for everyone, is important for everyone. Now, what we have also seen is, and our expectation was that younger men especially would have much more positive attitudes towards gender equality. But we've seen that a lot of the young people actually have even stronger negative attitudes towards gender equality. So when we looked at young men aged 16 to 19, they hold far more traditional attitudes across multiple areas. In Vietnam, for example, 60% of the young men agreeing that secretarial jobs are better suited for women compared to just about 40% of women. And so socialization, the role of education is really, really important in terms of challenging some of these norms. I'll talk about three key things that we are doing at UN Women. One is we have a he for she campaign, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. And this is where we get men, especially those in power, those who have influence, whether they are political leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, to actually buy in to the gender equality agenda, because they have influence. They can use their power and influence to make to change things. The second thing we do is something called the Stereotype Alliance, because we see a lot of these attitudes, perception, and norms perpetuated through media. And so the Stereotype Alliance actually works with the private sector, with advertisers, with organizations to change how they portray women in media and how they portray the roles of men and women in media. The third thing we try and do is, especially around the issue of unpaid care work, is to move the personal to be political, the personal to be public. So for a long time, the idea of care work has been taken to be a household level issue, where women are taking care of children, they're taking care of families. We talk about redistributing this between men and women within households, and this is really, really important. But at the same time, we want it to be public discourse for governments to take responsibility for provision of universal care in their countries. So we have a program on transforming the care economy, where we are working with governments around the world so that they can can make public investments, they can expand their physical space to accommodate and to invest in care, and to look at that not just as a cost to them, but to also look at it in terms of what is the benefit to a country when they invest in universal childcare, the creation of jobs, bringing more women into the tax bracket to contribute more to GDP, as Maximo mentioned earlier. So we're trying to make some of these issues that we've always looked at as household level issues into the public expenditure, public investment domain. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jemima. And I think that I'm going to quote you in the future on the moving from personal to political and creating that dialogue space. I really like that phrasing. So we are fortunate to have with us today representatives of the 2 focus countries of the joint program, who can now give us the country level perspective and present concrete examples of how gender transformative approaches and methods have been put into place. So first, I would like to turn to Mr. Carlos Shango, Undersecretary for Family Farming from the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock of Ecuador. We are extremely grateful for your availability to join the event in this late hour in Quito. So Carlos, first question. As we've heard in the previous interventions, addressing discriminatory gender norms is indispensable to achieving lasting and transformative change in the lives of rural women and men. Can you tell us why addressing unequal gender norms is essential to improving food security, nutrition, and gender equality in Ecuador?
Yupachani mashilis tukuikuna. Ajichishi, Ajifunja, Ajituta, Jaskiwaichinyukashungumunda. Thank you, Liz. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Let me talk first a little bit about my country and then about family farming and before addressing your very important question. Ecuador is probably the 2nd smallest country in South America. We are 18 million people. 55% of them are women, and another aspect of Ecuador is that we are very, very intercultural. And the smallest probably country, or the 2nd smallest, and 14 indigenous nationalities. We live a lot of mestizos here, Montubios, Afro-Ecuadorians, white people, so this is important because we need to apply an intersectional approach to our work, where we collect and analyze information, not only by gender and age, for example, but also for ethnicity. Ecuador, unfortunately, in Ecuador, 15% of total population is undernourished, and 13% is severely food insecure. So now we have this family farming play as an essential role in reducing food insecurity and malnutrition in Ecuador. Family farming generates more than 70% of rural jobs and produces approximately more than 60% of the food consumed in my country, in addition to generating other positive environmental, cultural, and social impacts. Rural women, like my mother, Manuela, are the heart of the agriculture and family farming. They play a fundamental role to ensure food security, improve livelihoods, and responsibly manage natural resources. Without them, it would not be possible to sustain the economy or contribute to food security and food sovereignty in Ecuador. However, as we have mentioned, one of the big problems in family farming is gender inequality. Despite the fact that 61% of rural women are involved in agro-productive activities in Ecuador, their key contribution is not adequately recognized. Only 38% of women are formally economically active compared to 71% of men. As you can see in the slides, they do not have the conditions and resources necessary to improve their productivity. In addition, they have to assume almost exclusively all the care and domestic responsibilities. As a result, their overall workload is very high and their possibilities for training or entrepreneurship remain limited. You will see national poverty line from 2016 to 2018, the huge difference between men and women. Women, the dark side. Gender inequality is further evidenced by the fact that, as you can see, women's wages are between 13 and 26% lower than those of men. Women in rural areas work on average 23 hours more per week than men, and 6 out of 10 rural women have experienced some form of gender-based violence in Ecuador. The Ministry of Agriculture recognizes this marked inequality and transforms it into political will to overcome these barriers. We think that we have a huge opportunity to solve these kind of issues. So in the National Agricultural Strategy for Rural Women, in Spanish es la Estrategia Nacional Agropecuaria para la Mujer Rural, the government of Ecuador recognized these inequalities are the result of discriminatory structures against women that are perpetuated by social norms. They determine the acceptable action of women and men, unfortunately. It is in this context that FAO, IFAD, and WFP, in the framework of the Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches for Food Security and Nutrition, are working hand in hand with the Ministry of Agriculture to translate the political will of the government of Ecuador into transformative changes towards gender equality for the well-being of all rural women and girls, as well as men and boys. I will stop and I will go back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Carlos. So herein lies the challenge. We know how important it is to address the negative social norms, but we also know it's very difficult and complex undertaking. Can you tell us how the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, along with other national partners, are taking steps to address negative social norms in Ecuador under the joint program?
Yes, with the joint program, first of all, the joint program contributes to the implementation of the National Agricultural Strategy for Rural Women and the National Rural Women's Committee in close collaboration with the national government. At the same time, it supports development strategies of the decentralized autonomous government and other local actors, finding synergies and complementarities through innovative tools and methodologies. Thus, the objectives of the JTA in Ecuador go hand in hand with the national priorities and contribute to the reduction of gender barriers and gaps in family farming. Gender transformative approaches are being implemented to strengthen the productive capacities and access to services and markets of rural women and their decision-making power at all levels. What's important to emphasize is that the activities of the joint program are being implemented at multiple levels, at the level of policy, producers' organizations, communities, and households. This addresses the considerations that to create an enabling environment in which women and men can make decisions and improve their livelihoods and well-being, we need to see change in personal expectation, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as the way they are represented and applied in society at a large, at meso and macro levels. To start with, we have been carrying out social norms diagnostic studies under the joint program to identify and better understand the prevailing social norms that prevent gender equality. The results of these studies will also help us better design future programs and strategies. At the policy level, in alignment with the National Agricultural Strategy for Rural Women, the joint program and the ministry are working together on policy monitoring to meet a national objective to include gender statistics in the agricultural public information system, which will allow us to make visible and value the contribution of women to the development of this sector. It is our objective to include gender social norms indicators as well in this system. At the community level, one of the main methodologies implemented is the Dimitra clubs. The Dimitra clubs are informal community-based groups of rural women and men who come together on a voluntary basis to discuss and seek solutions for community problems, relying on their own local capacities and resources. The clubs are inclusive and participatory spaces. They facilitate collective action to address and challenge commonly taken for granted assumptions and norms that perpetuate inequalities. At the organizational level, some of the methodologies applied include cerrando brecha, which means closing the gap in English. This methodology is based on a series of tools designed to obtain information, both from the board of directors and members on the level of gender equality achieved by rural organizations, as well as the reasons why gender equality has not been achieved and possible actions that will help to reduce the existing gender gap in the organization. The last one, social and behavior change community strategy, applied at the producer association level by applying the learning communities methodology of the Family Farming Secretariat that seeks to have an impact at the household and community level through knowledge transfer. This strategy will also help overcome social and structural barriers and positively influence women and men's attitudes and behaviors. These methodologies are currently being implemented in 4 provinces in my country: Manabí in the coast, Guayas also in the coast, Imbabura in the Andes region, and Morona Santiago in the Amazonic region of my country, reaching approximately 1,000 families and more than 300 public officials involved from the Ministry of Agriculture. We know this is a very small amount of people, but we are proud that we are starting with this. It also includes the Ministry of Social and Economic Inclusion, Ban Ecuador, which is the public bank for agricultural support, and local authorities. We are confident that this collaboration with the JTA will make an important contribution to achieving national strategies. We are making, I think, a historic milestone that is just the beginning of the hard work to achieve equal conditions in our country. I would like to repeat, equal conditions for men and women in our country. We are proud to have taken the first step with your support and experiences. Thank you all very much.
Carlos, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences from the program in Ecuador. And again, we are extremely grateful for your commitment and participation at this hour in Quito. So thank you very much. Now let me turn to Billy Molosoni, who represents CARE International based in Malawi. CARE has been one of the major implementing partners of the joint program in Malawi and has led a joint social norms diagnostic study in 5 selected districts. We've already heard a little about this tool from Carlos, and it's great to have the chance now to focus more on the tool and to hear about its implementation in Malawi. So, Billy, first question for you. Could you please speak to the goal of the social diagnostic study and highlight the most interesting findings and insights gained during the design and implementation of this study in Malawi?
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues. As Liz has mentioned earlier, Malawi is one of the 2 focal countries where the joint program is being implemented. And in Malawi, one of the key program's objective is enhancing the economic autonomy of women and the youth through their improved financial inclusion. And this program is implemented against a background of low access to formal financial services and products. You may wish to know that in Malawi, 45% of the population, that's the adult population, aged 15 plus, have access to at least one financial service product. And there have been efforts in Malawi to make sure that more rural and banked, including women, are accessing formal financial services as well as products. However, despite all those efforts, only 36% of women have access to at least one financial service and product. So that's basically the background. And there have been efforts to address some of the structural issues, the systems, but there was need, I think, to understand what could be the other factors. And in this case, the social norms diagnostic study wanted to understand the most prevailing gender-related social norms that are negatively impacting on women as well as youth VSLA members in accessing, utilizing, as well as using some of the formal financial services and products. And at the end of the day, we're looking at the social norms diagnostic study to make recommendations around shifting the way the joint program would be implemented to achieve one of its program objectives. And this was a collaborative study, which was led by CARE Malawi in the context of the joint program, and also as part of the SIGAP Fin Equity Social Norms Diagnostics Collaborative Lab. The study involved 2 local universities, the University of Malawi, especially the Sociology Department, which has courses on gender, and also the Longo University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, the Human Ecology Department, which also offers courses in gender. We engaged with more than 700 participants, with almost 75% of those participants being female. And this was done in 5 districts where the project was being implemented. Very key in the study was to unpack some of the behaviors of women as customers, as well as users of the financial products and services. Basically understanding are these behaviors shaped by the gender norms, and how is it impacting on access to formal financial services. So that was basically the key objective. We discovered some interesting information, and possibly just to share key highlights. We investigated 5 gender-related norms, 4 of which were to do with women, and 1 was focusing on the youth. And what we noted is that 2 of the gender-related norms, these were married women should seek approval from spouses on all financial-related matters, and women should not own assets in their name, are strongly motivated by gender ideology-related metanorm. The metanorm, basically, we discovered that beyond the norms, there are also the norms that we're investigating. There are also norms that are also influencing. One of which is basically the belief that men or husbands are the head of the house, and therefore should ultimately make decisions on all household decisions. That has got an influence around women's access to formal financial services and products. We also noted that around women owning assets in their name and women spending or women investing their money in the form of financial services, there is also a meta-norm which revolves around the home belonging to the woman. In that case, basically the expectation is that women should spend their money around maintaining the home, so spending more money on household-related issues as compared to them investing. We also observed that if you look at that, basically what it means is that if we are to increase women's access, youth access to formal financial services and products, we have to go beyond addressing the supply side issues. And as such, it came out very clearly that we need to address the social norms. One of the popular sayings that came during the study was around a passenger on a bike does not ring the bell. And basically what we heard is that women are passengers. If you are in a marriage, women are passengers, therefore you can't ring the bell. Meaning that due to their inferior status, they have to be submissive to their spouses, but also they are not in a position to make decisions. Through the study, we also learned of people who influence norms. And this is very important, especially if we are to change some of the norms, or if we are to trigger a change in some of the norms. Of course, there were traditional influencers like the husbands, the parents, in-laws, but there are also other non-traditional influencers like the marriage counselors. In the communities where we went, it was common that when you have family disputes, you expect the marriage counselors to address them. And basically, you would expect the marriage counselors to strengthen the norm that the man is the head of the household. But in two of the districts where we went, what we learned is that even amongst the maternal parents, they would support what much as would have anticipated them to support the norm, but there were others who were on the side who expected that their married daughter should have some financial decision-making power and also make savings. So those are basically some of that could also be an entry point for programming. Adherence to the norm or non-adherence has got rewards, and there are very strong rewards as well as sanctions that we discovered. The rewards were basically around being regarded as a role model. So in the community, wherever you're working, you'd be a reference point, but also having a guarantee of a strong marriage, being praised by the community. But if these norms are not followed, there are sanctions. So either they are code names, there are risks of divorce as well as violence. In the case of the youth, parents could disown their daughter, but also if there was a bride price involved, parents would be forced to pay back double the bride price. And basically what some of the women told us is that disobeying a husband is a sure way to a divorced wife, to a divorced life, basically underlying that there are those sanctions that are there. Though the norms are there prevalent, we also learned that the norms can relax. So there are certain circumstances in which the norms can relax, and we talked to women in polygamous relationships, and basically what we learned is that the first or the second wife, depending on the community, but also the marriage versus the residence system, the women may have more freedom to make their own decisions, because and mostly for the first wife, because of the lower attention, the husband is not there present all the time, so at least he has that leeway to make decisions. But also expectations around what men are supposed to do. So if the men are not providing, those situations could lead to the norms being relaxed. Although the norms are there, we identified a positive deviance. Positive deviance in the sense that these are women as well as the youth who are basically deviating from the norm. And we heard of women who opened bank accounts without the knowledge of the husband. However, that also brings in some backlash when the husband discovers. So these are some of the interesting findings. In Malawi, we have two marriage systems, the patrilineal and matrilineal marriage system. And the expectation is that in the matrilineal system, women would have more influence, would have more decision-making power. But what we discovered is that the marriage system alone is not a key factor to influencing social norms, but also the marriage residence. So the marriage residence basically we considered around where is the woman staying. So if the woman is staying in the man's village, which technically would be around the Viruloko kind of residence, she has, even if it's in a matrilineal society system, she has less power because she's even being controlled by the relatives of the man even when the man is away. So the marriage system, the marriage residence rather, also has a bigger influence on how the norms are being adhered to. I think that's what I can share in terms of responding to your question, Liz.
Thank you, Billy. These are very important results generated by the social diagnostic study, so we very much appreciate learning more about them. We'd welcome your reflections, though, on the methodology itself. We know that such tools are not easy to implement and that their complexity can make program implementers shy away from going down that path. We would be interested in hearing about the process you put in place, some of the challenges you may have faced, and also what lessons you learned and hope to share with future implementers.
Thanks, Liz, for that question. In terms of the process, there are a couple of things that I would like to share. One, it's around the team composition. It's very important to put together a competent core research team, as well as the data collection team. And the team should have a mix of skills around participatory gender analysis, around social norms work. In our case, we used more of a qualitative method. So you need a team that is qualified or that has experience around conducting qualitative research. Beyond the team, you need to define from the start your study purpose, the objectives, develop the guiding questions, identifying who are your key participants. On identifying the key participants, you have to be very specific and also going further to look at the socioeconomic demographics or characteristics that you want to investigate further. In our case, much as we looked at married women, but there were issues around marriage residence, as Eddie mentioned, whether they are in polygamous relationships or not. Then you need to identify the framework for which is going to guide your study. In our case, we started off with the CARES social norms and analysis plot framework. But later on, we adopted the Georgetown University social norms exploration tool. And finally, we settled for an adapted CGAP inequity social norms agnostic framework. Why adapted? Basically, very important, and this is something that we have learned, is that we, much as we looked at 3 frameworks, but we picked which ones from each of those frameworks would suit the context in Malawi. So we took some elements from the SNAP and SNET and weaved it into the CGAP. And basically, in terms of the process, first we had to define what is the desired financial inclusion outcome, because this was around understanding the behaviors of women in accessing formal financial services and products. So we need to understand what are the desired financial inclusion outcome? What is the program trying to achieve at the end of the day? Having identified that, then we looked at what are the key behaviors. So key behaviors that are impacting on the desired outcome. So understanding what is currently happening. Are women having economic autonomy? Are youth having economic autonomy? If not, why? What are the key behaviors? And then we went further to investigate around which norms are driving those kind of behaviors. And once we had identified the norms, we looked at who are the key influencers of these norms. And so then we went into the field to do a deep dive. I should mention that the team in Malawi were very lucky in the context of the joint program on gender transformative, because we benefited a lot from capacity development by the Georgetown University on the SNET, as well as the SIGAF Inequity Group as part of a collab meetings. And that made us to have, especially around identifying the gender norms, the specific gender norms, it helped the team very much. Those capacity development initiatives did. But also, we should mention that I think we also got very tremendous support from the care from the care gender justice team around defining our approach. In terms of the key learning, before I go into the key learning, having identified the gender norms, now we had to go into the field to deep dive to understand whether the norms really exist or not. And basically, in terms of the process, we went to the districts to validate the identified social norms with the key stakeholders. And that included the financial service providers themselves. It included government, as well as the non-state actors. And also, it also included us going to the community to test some of the tools. Some of the tools that we had developed were new to the team, so we needed to see whether they would work. And one of which has become popular in Malawi, even among the academicians, and they're looking at incorporating that into the gender studies, is the use of the vignette. So we conducted the study. After conducting the study, we reflected the findings of the study using the outcome mapping process with the program, as well as key stakeholders, including government, state actors, non-state actors, as well as the form of financial inclusion service providers. And finally, after sharing those findings, we went back to the community to validate the findings with the district level stakeholders, as well as the community. So you can see that the process was more of a back and forth learning in the process. And there are a number of lessons that we have generated, which we'd like to share for those that are interested in undertaking social norms diagnostics. One of the key lessons is that social norms diagnostics is key to influencing social behavior change. And because of that, you need also to understand who are influencing the norms. So much as I would have just focused on women, but what we learned is that if we had not talked to the reference groups, the people who influence the norms, I think wouldn't have understood much about the norms. In our study, we talked to the spouses, we talked to the mothers-in-law, we talked to the siblings. We identified a range of influences, and we deliberately went and talked to them. Another key...
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate that you have so much information to share from this experience, and I hope that participants will reach out to you to collect that information. But we have such little time today that if it's all right with you, I'm going to move on to the next part of our session.
That's fine, Liz.
Apologies, and thank you. And really, I appreciate the depth of flexibility and adaptability that CARE has applied to the program in Malawi in order to respond to the specific contexts across the country. So thank you, Billy, for that. Now let me please turn to Marta Berggren, the Deputy Director of the Gender Equality Division at Global Affairs Canada. Marta, my first question for you is actually more of it's not phrased so much as a question, but we would be very grateful for you to share with us what Canada has done domestically to position itself as a global leader on gender transformative approaches.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here. So I'll start by saying that Canada believes that promoting rights-based, open, and inclusive societies is an effective way to build safer and more sustainable and prosperous world. We're committed to confronting the social and structural barriers and systemic forms of discrimination that limit the ability of women, girls, and other marginalized groups from participating fully in work, education, healthcare, decision-making, basically every aspect of their lives. But we also approach this topic from a place of humility. We're aware that we too face our challenges and that much work remains to be done to address systemic inequalities, racism, and discrimination in Canada, including for Indigenous peoples. There's so much gender transformative work happening in Canada, both at the governmental level, but also coordinated by non-governmental organizations. So I thought I could run through just a small sampling of examples of some of the government's initiatives. So for starters, Canada passed the Canadian Gender Budgeting Act in 2018, which entrenched gender budgeting into our laws. The act requires that all government departments consider gender and diversity in all of their decisions around taxation and resource allocation. The government then analyzes the impacts of expenditure programs on gender and diversity and makes them public to ensure transparency and accountability. Also in 2018, we established a dedicated department for women and gender equality. It works to advance gender equality through an intersectional gendered lens and works with a range of key stakeholders like civil society organizations, the private sector, provincial and territorial governments, as well as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. In 2015, the Government of Canada made gender-based analysis plus mandatory in all federal decision-making. This is an analytical tool that provides a method for assessing systemic equalities, as well as a means to assess how women, men, and gender diverse people may experience policies, programs, and initiatives. The application of a gender-based analysis plus across all international policies and programs is a requirement and allows us to be more responsive to inequalities and needs. Internally, Global Affairs Canada has been working to equip staff to implement a feminist, intersectional, and human rights-based approach. For instance, all staff have been required to take training on this gender-based analysis plus. Specifically related to food, for example, in 2019, Canada worked with key stakeholders to launch our first domestic food policy. Among its various ambitious goals, the policy recognizes the interdependence of social, health, environmental, and economic components of the food systems, and aims to ensure that Canadians can afford the food they need through a series of key action areas, including addressing the root causes of household food insecurity. Canada also created the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council as a central piece of the food policy itself. This is a multidisciplinary group representing diversified populations across the country, and that produces reports, gives advice, and provides assessments on current and emerging food-related challenges and opportunities, as well as best practices. So those are just a few examples, and I'd be happy to share some more information or provide some links if anybody has any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Marta. This is really impressive, and I very much appreciate the gender-based analysis plus framework as an interesting integrated approach across the Government of Canada. So thank you for sharing that. Second question, could you also please tell us how Canada has worked to apply this experience and expertise internationally?
Absolutely. So Canada has a feminist foreign policy, and it is cross-cutting. It's a whole of government effort to address the interconnected drivers of human rights, gender equality, and inclusion. It applies across all our international efforts, including diplomacy, trade, security, development, consular services, everything. We've built on decades of Canadian work to advance human rights and gender equality as a key component of this foreign policy. What's different today is a focus not on the equality of outcomes, but a desire for transformational change and addressing discriminatory practices that prevent equality of action. That being said, our approach aims to be context sensitive and based on inclusive partnerships, bearing in mind that Canadian efforts must be informed by the perspectives and voices of affected individuals. We try to pay particular attention to who is and who is not at the table and why. Building on this, in 2017, Canada established its Feminist International Assistance Policy. It calls for the transformation of unequal power relations, systemic discrimination, and harmful gender norms and practices. And it seeks and includes seeking opportunities to include marginalized persons in all programming. It recognizes that gender stereotypes also restrict men and boys to specific roles. Under the Feminist International Assistance Policy, Canada has committed to ensuring that gender equitable, intersectional, and human rights-based considerations are integrated into the design of nearly all international assistance initiatives. We prioritize investments, partnerships, and advocacy efforts that have the greatest potential to close the gender gaps, eliminate barriers to gender and broader inequality or equality, and help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We've put our money where our mouth is as well. Within 3 years of the release of the Feminist International Assistance Policy, Canada ranked as the #1 bilateral donor in the share of aid contributing to gender equality, and a world-leading donor to women's rights organizations. Canada is now the top OECD-ranked donor for its share of aid supporting gender equality. In 2021 to 22, 99% of Canada's bilateral international development assistance either targeted or integrated gender equality results. And again, I'll provide just a couple of examples in interest of time. Canada made a $300 million contribution to support the establishment of the Equality Fund in 2019. This offers grants to grassroots feminist organizations to provide sustainable funding for women's movements. And this represented the largest single investment ever made by a government to a global feminist movement. Canada also committed $150 million over 5 years to its Women's Voice and Leadership Program, which provides funding for projects that respond to the needs and priorities identified by women's rights organizations and places women at the center of project implementation. This support helps these organizations advance gender equality and empower women in developing countries. And specifically related to gender transformation and nutrition, the Government of Canada supports a network of international NGOs in creating and advancing the Gender Transformative Framework for Nutrition. This is a Canadian-led, evidence-based conceptual model that expands the potential of nutrition programs to tackle gender inequalities. In addition to our development assistance work and funding, Canada has long been recognized by the international community as a defender of human rights. In a global environment that is unfortunately seeing growing resistance to progressive language on human rights and gender equality, like-minded partners in civil society are increasingly turning to Canada for our leadership in advancing in these areas. Canada is a vocal advocate in multilateral fora for advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity as central to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, we have been actively engaged in the Gender Equality and Women, Girls, and Empowerment workstream at CFS as another way to share perspectives on gender transformative approaches, and we hope that the process can continue and can reach a consensus product. Canada also leads on the annual Elimination of Violence Against Women resolution at the UN Human Rights Council and co-leads the biannual resolution on child early and forced marriages at the UN General Assembly. But we also know that transformative change takes time and patience, not least because of the deeply rooted nature of social norms and power relations. While Canada has made strides in the last 5 years, we do recognize that some of our efforts will only see progress in future generations. We're proud to work alongside like-minded partners as we advance feminist foreign policy objectives together. And we look forward to our continued collaboration with all those who share a commitment to a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future.
Thank you, Marta. And I really appreciate your observation of the need to start from a place of humility and patience, recognizing that we're all working towards gender equality in multiple spheres in the social, economic, and political space. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for such an interesting discussion today. We are a little tight for time, so we've tried to pull together a couple of the questions in the chat into one. And I would ask Jemima, Carlos, and Billy to respond as briefly as possible, and then we will look to respond to questions in the chat. So please, Jemima, Carlos, and Billy, prepare yourselves to jump in with answers. The question is as follows. What approaches might you consider to institutionalize social norms, assessments to advance gender equality? Jemima?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think studies like what Billy has been talking about and what I was presenting on the gender attitude survey are really important for us. Not just to inform some of the areas that we need to target, but to also see what progress we're making. And I think what is going to be really useful is to integrate social norms assessments, attitudes assessments in some of the national surveys and statistics, because what we see now is a lot of these studies being done in very location-specific areas. You know, imagine if what Billy is doing in Malawi is being done across countries. So we need to integrate some of these into national surveys and statistics so that they can start informing policy level action as well.
Thank you, Jemima. Carlos, would you like to add to Jemima's response?
Yes, thank you. We from the ministry, we have like the agricultural public information system, and we are having this monitoring and evaluation, especially in agriculture with a gender focus. Agriculture is something where women are have a protagonistic role, but we don't recognize that. So from the ministry, we will have this information. We are preparing all the tools. Next year, we will have a huge work at the national level, and we will include this kind of information to see how we are like focusing agriculture, family farming with gender, taking into account the gender inequality.
Thank you, Carlos. And Billy, any final words on institutionalizing the approaches?
Thanks, Liz. Just to add on what Carlos and Jemima have said, in Malawi, we are working with the two universities in developing modules for gender courses at different levels. And I think because at the end of the day, gender experts would go through the universities, and we want them to be familiarized with the social norms diagnostics. But also we are looking at coming up with a social norms diagnostics community of practice in which we can share lessons as well as programming and how we can influence social norms programming within Malawi. Over.
Thank you, Billy. So friends, colleagues, and collaborators, thank you for this invigorating discussion. Before we wrap up, though, my colleague is about to launch a poll as we would appreciate your feedback on the event. This will only take a few seconds to complete, and it's going to help us to both conceptualize and organize future events. So thank you for everyone who is responding. And as we come to the concluding part of our event, it is my pleasure to invite Emily Wild, Senior Technical Specialist for Social Inclusion and Poverty Targeting at IFAD, to close the event. Emily, you have the floor.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm delighted to be with you in this event, and on behalf of IFAD and Naya Belchico, the lead technical specialist on gender targeting and social inclusion, who unfortunately could not be here today, although she really would have liked to have been. But I'm pleased to provide the closing remarks for this interesting discussion. And first of all, I would just like to thank all the partners, the co-organizers and speakers for taking the time to join us today. And I'd like to express my appreciation to the colleagues on the Joint Programme on Gender Transformative Approaches for bringing us together for this valuable session, and of course to the European Union for their financial support and collaboration. Now, for more than 40 years, IFAD has been at the forefront of promoting gender equality and women's empowerment in rural communities. As we heard today, a gender transformative approach goes beyond women's empowerment and recognizes that gender inequality is not simply a function of unequal resources or opportunities. We know that to achieve results in this regard, we need to address the root causes of inequality and change mindsets. For this reason, since 2019, IFAD has been committed to incorporating gender transformative approaches in its programs. And now we're working to ensure that 35% of our project portfolio is rated as gender transformative at design, and 60% is fully gender mainstreamed or transformative at completion. The JPGTA is critical to IFAD's endeavor to become truly gender transformative. In part, it's critical because of the important country-level activities being implemented in Ecuador and Malawi that are analyzing discriminatory social norms and finding ways to change them, reaching thousands of women, men, and their families, as we have heard from our speakers today. But the JPGTA is also triggering a much-needed conversation within the Rome-based agencies and their partners about how we can ensure that our work to further gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment makes a transformative and lasting impact. Discriminatory social norms are an underlying cause of food insecurity, malnutrition, and unsustainable agriculture, and must be addressed to achieve lasting positive change in these areas. They lead to unequal power relations between men and women, and pervasive discrimination against women in both the public and private spheres of life that constrains their lives and well-being. We heard today that we must take social norms into account in order to make progress in addressing the root causes of gender inequality in the context of agriculture, food security, and nutrition. I learned about the importance of being systematic in identifying social norms by adapting the available methodologies to the context. But we also heard that this work is complex and takes time, which is why learning opportunities such as this event are so crucial. Learning from other development actors such as UN Women and Global Affairs Canada can help us advance along this path to identify other successful methodologies and ways to embrace and accelerate the change needed within our own organizations. We need stronger partnerships for an urgent action. We look forward to continuing the collaboration with FAO, WFP, and our partners, and renew our commitment to support the governments of Ecuador and Malawi. And thanks to all of you for being with us for today's event. I hope that the insights and good practices I shared today will inspire others.
Thank you, Emily, for your comprehensive summary of today's event. Wonderful. I couldn't have said it better myself. I would very much like to thank all of our speakers and panelists, the audience, as well as the organizers for providing this platform to reflect on both the experiences with and emerging opportunities for addressing discriminatory social norms in the context of agriculture, food security, and nutrition. Once again, our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Shango and those of you who have stayed up late in the night to follow this event. Excellencies, colleagues, and collaborators, thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.